Welcome to the channel, where we go beyond headlines and bring you clear, fact-driven reporting on the events shaping our world. This is not about noise or sensationalism, it's about understanding what's really happening behind the scenes. Here we break down complex global conflicts into simple, sharp insights so you can see the truth clearly, without confusion, without bias, just reality as it unfolds. What if the most dangerous assumption in modern security is the belief that any defense system can offer complete protection? Let's think about this carefully, because this is where perception often exceeds reality. Systems like missile defenses are designed with extraordinary precision, built on layers of technology, sensors, and rapid response mechanisms. They are engineered to intercept threats, to create a shield, to provide reassurance. And for the most part, they do exactly that. But the critical point is this: they are designed to reduce risk, not eliminate it entirely. No system, no matter how advanced, is built for perfection under all conditions, because every system operates within limits. Limits of capacity, limits of timing, limits of coordination. And when those limits are tested, the system does not necessarily fail completely, but it begins to show strain. Now imagine this in simple terms. Think of an umbrella in a storm. It works well in light rain, even in moderate conditions. But in a severe downpour with strong winds and constant pressure, water begins to get through. Not because the umbrella is poorly designed, but because the conditions exceed what it was built to handle. That is exactly how defense systems behave under extreme pressure. They are effective within expected scenarios, but when those scenarios change, when the volume of incoming threats increases significantly, the system must adapt, prioritize, and manage its resources. And in that process, gaps can appear. Now consider how these systems are structured. They rely on detection, tracking, and interception. Each step requires time and coordination. When threats arrive at a manageable pace, the system performs efficiently. But when multiple threats arrive simultaneously, especially in large numbers, the system must process them all at once. It must decide which threats to engage first, which to track, which to delay. And in that moment of prioritization, the system is no longer operating under ideal conditions. It is operating under pressure. And pressure introduces uncertainty. Now think about the implications of this. It does not mean the system has failed. It means it is being tested beyond its optimal capacity. But even a small number of missed interceptions can have a significant impact, not just physically, but psychologically. Because these systems are not only functional, they are symbolic. They represent protection, reliability, control, and when even a small number of threats get through, that perception begins to shift. Now consider the broader lesson. The belief in absolute protection creates a false sense of certainty. It leads to the assumption that risk has been eliminated rather than managed. And when reality challenges that assumption, the adjustment can be sudden and difficult. Because the expectation was not just high, it was absolute. Now think about how this affects decision making. When systems are believed to be nearly perfect, strategies are built around that belief. But if those systems show limitations under pressure, strategies must adapt. Risk must be reassessed. And that process, especially in real time, can be complex because it requires shifting from confidence to caution, from certainty to uncertainty. Let me put it clearly. No defense system is designed to be impenetrable. It is designed to be effective, to reduce threats, to manage risk, to provide a level of protection that allows operations to continue. But effectiveness is not the same as perfection. And when systems are pushed beyond their limits, that distinction becomes visible. And the question we must now ask is this: in a world where even the most advanced defenses have limits, are we truly prepared for the moment when those limits are tested, or have we simply assumed they would never be reached? What if the most effective way to defeat a defense system is not through precision, but through overwhelming it with sheer volume? Let's think about this carefully, because this is where the logic of modern conflict is shifting. Traditionally, military strategy emphasized accuracy, targeting specific assets with precision, minimizing waste, maximizing impact. But in the context of advanced defense systems, a different approach has emerged. Instead of trying to outmatch the system technologically, the focus shifts to exceeding its capacity. Because every defense system, no matter how sophisticated, is designed with certain assumptions. Assumptions about the number of threats it will face, the timing of those threats, and the resources available to counter them. And when those assumptions are exceeded, the system is forced into a different mode of operation, one defined not by control, but by prioritization under pressure. Now imagine this in simple terms. Picture a gatekeeper managing a steady flow of people entering a building. As long as the flow is controlled, each person can be checked and processed efficiently. But if a large crowd suddenly rushes the entrance, the gatekeeper cannot maintain the same level of control. Some people will pass through unchecked, not because the gatekeeper is ineffective, but because the situation exceeds manageable limits. That is exactly how saturation attacks work. They do not aim to defeat the system in a single strike. They aim to stretch it, to overload it, to force it into a position where it cannot respond to everything at once. Now consider how this applies to missile defense. When a limited number of threats are detected, the system can track and intercept them with high probability. But when dozens or even hundreds of threats arrive in quick succession, the system must make decisions rapidly. It must allocate interceptors, prioritize targets, and manage its resources. And in that process, it cannot guarantee that every threat will be neutralized. Not because the technology has failed, but because the volume has exceeded the system's design parameters. Now think about the strategic advantage of this approach. Saturation does not require each individual element to be highly advanced. Its strength lies in coordination and timing. Multiple threats launched together from different directions at different intervals create complexity, and complexity is difficult to manage, especially under time pressure. The system is not just responding to individual threats, it is responding to a pattern, a wave, a continuous flow that challenges its ability to keep up. Now consider the psychological dimension. When a defense system is overwhelmed, even partially, it changes perception. It shows that the system has limits, and once those limits are visible, confidence begins to shift. Not necessarily collapse, but adjust. Because the expectation of complete protection is replaced by the reality of conditional effectiveness. Now think about the broader implications. Saturation attacks change the rules of defense by redefining what success means. It is no longer about stopping every threat. It is about managing as many as possible. And from the attacker's perspective, it is no longer necessary to achieve total penetration. It is enough to get some through. Because even a small number of successful impacts can have a disproportionate effect, both physically and psychologically. Now consider how this affects future strategy. Defense systems must evolve, not just to improve interception rates, but to handle higher volumes, to adapt to changing patterns, to operate effectively under sustained pressure. Because the challenge is no longer just about capability, it is about capacity. And capacity, by definition, can be tested. Let me put it clearly. Saturation attacks do not defeat defense systems by breaking them. They defeat them by overwhelming them, by pushing them beyond their limits, by forcing them into a state where they cannot respond perfectly. And in that imperfection lies the opportunity. And the question we must now ask is this. In a world where volume and timing can challenge even the most advanced defenses, is strength defined by how well a system performs under normal conditions, or by how it holds up when those conditions are pushed to the extreme? What if the true objective in modern warfare is no longer to destroy a city, but to expose the system that was supposed to protect it? Let's think about this carefully, because this is where the focus of conflict has shifted. In earlier eras, military strategy often aimed directly at physical targets, territory, infrastructure, population centers. The goal was visible impact. But today the objective is often more layered. It is not only about what is hit, but about what is revealed. Because modern defense systems are designed not just to intercept threats, but to project confidence. They signal protection, control, and technological superiority. And when those systems are tested, when their limits are exposed, the impact extends far beyond the immediate physical damage. It becomes a demonstration, a signal that the system is not absolute, and that signal can be as powerful as any strike. Now imagine this in simple terms. Think of a locked door that is believed to be secure. As long as it remains unopened, confidence in it stays intact. But if someone manages to open it, even slightly, the perception changes immediately. The door still exists, it may still be strong, but it is no longer seen as impenetrable. That is exactly how modern warfare targets systems. It is not always about breaking them completely, it is about showing that they can be breached. And once that is shown, the strategic balance begins to shift. Now consider how this applies to defense infrastructure. Systems like missile shields are built to create a sense of security. They are part of a larger network that includes detection, tracking, interception, and communication. And together they form a structure that is meant to operate seamlessly. But when that structure is challenged, when even a small number of threats get through, it highlights the system's vulnerabilities. Not necessarily as failures, but as limitations. And those limitations, once visible, become part of the strategic landscape. Now think about the implications of this. The focus of conflict moves from physical damage to systemic exposure. The question is no longer just how much damage is done, but what that damage reveals about the system. Does it show gaps in coverage? Does it indicate limits in capacity? Does it suggest that under certain conditions the system cannot perform as expected? These are the questions that shape perception. And perception in modern conflict is a form of power. Now consider the psychological effect. When a system is believed to be reliable, it creates confidence. But when that belief is challenged even slightly, it introduces doubt, and doubt changes behavior. It affects how people respond, how leaders make decisions, how strategies are developed. Because once a vulnerability is known, it must be accounted for. It cannot be ignored. Now think about the broader strategic dimension. Exposing a system's limits does not require total success. It requires just enough to demonstrate that the system is not perfect. And once that demonstration is made, it can influence future actions. It can encourage further testing, further pressure, further attempts to exploit those vulnerabilities, because the barrier has already been crossed, not physically, but perceptually. Now consider how this shapes future conflict. Defense systems must not only function effectively, they must maintain credibility, because credibility is what sustains deterrence. And when credibility is questioned, deterrence weakens. Not immediately, not completely, but gradually, and that gradual shift can have long-term consequences. Let me put it clearly. Modern warfare is no longer just about what is destroyed, it is about what is revealed. It is about exposing the limits of systems that were designed to provide assurance. And once those limits are visible, they become part of the equation. They influence decisions, shape strategies, and alter expectations. And the question we must now ask is this: in a world where revealing a system's vulnerability can be as impactful as damaging it, is the real target the city, or the belief that the city is fully protected? What if the most profound impact of modern conflict is not the physical damage it causes, but the fear and uncertainty it spreads in the minds of those who are supposed to feel protected? Let's think about this carefully, because this is where the true weight of events is often felt. When defense systems are in place, they serve not only as technical solutions, but as psychological assurances. They create a sense of safety, a belief that threats can be managed, that risks are under control, and that belief shapes behavior. It allows people to function normally, to trust that systems will perform as expected. But when those systems are tested, when they show even small signs of strain, that sense of certainty begins to shift. Not because protection has disappeared entirely, but because it is no longer perceived as absolute. And in that shift, fear begins to take hold. Now imagine this in simple terms. You live in a building with a security system you trust completely. You rarely think about it because you assume it will work if needed. But then one day you hear that the system failed to detect an intrusion. Even if the building is still secure, your perception changes. You become more alert, more cautious, more aware of potential risk. The environment has not fundamentally changed, but your sense of safety has. That is exactly how psychological impact works in conflict. It transforms perception, and perception transforms behavior. Now consider how this plays out on a larger scale. When civilians begin to question the effectiveness of defense systems, their daily lives are affected. Decisions that once felt routine, travel, work, movement, become influenced by uncertainty. People adjust their behavior not because they are directly experiencing danger at every moment, but because the possibility of danger feels more immediate. And that feeling spreads quickly, because fear, unlike physical damage, is not confined to a single location. It moves through communication, through observation, through shared experience. Now think about leadership. Governments and decision makers rely on public confidence. They depend on the belief that systems are working, that risks are being managed. But when that confidence weakens, pressure increases. Leaders must respond not only to the physical situation, but to the perception of that situation. They must reassure, adjust, and sometimes act more decisively to restore a sense of control. And in doing so, their range of options can become more constrained, because decisions are now shaped by urgency as well as strategy. Now consider the broader strategic effect. Psychological impact can amplify the consequences of physical events. A limited number of successful strikes, for example, may not cause widespread damage, but they can create a perception of vulnerability. And that perception can influence how both sides approach the conflict. One side may feel emboldened, believing the pressure is effective. The other may feel compelled to respond more forcefully, to restore deterrence. And in that exchange, the situation can escalate, not because of the scale of damage, but because of the scale of perception. Now think about how quickly this dynamic develops. In an age of instant communication, images and information spread rapidly. Events are seen, interpreted, and discussed in real time. And each interpretation adds to the collective perception. What might have been a localized incident becomes a widely shared experience. And once it enters that shared space, it influences not just those directly affected, but a much larger audience. Let me put it clearly. The psychological dimension of conflict is not secondary, it is central. It shapes behavior, influences decisions, and amplifies outcomes. Because in the end, security is not only about protection, it is about belief in that protection. And when that belief is shaken, even slightly, the effects can be far-reaching. And the question we must now ask is this: in a world where fear and uncertainty can spread faster than any weapon, is the true impact of conflict measured by what is destroyed or by how people begin to feel? What if the most decisive shift in conflict happens not when defenses fail completely, but when people stop believing they will always work? Let's think about this carefully, because this is where perception becomes as powerful as reality. Security systems are designed not only to intercept threats, but to create confidence. They send a signal, both internally and externally, that protection exists, that risks are managed, that stability can be maintained, and as long as that belief holds, it shapes behavior. People act with assurance, leaders make decisions with clarity, and adversaries are deterred by the expectation that their efforts will be unsuccessful. But when that belief begins to weaken, even slightly, the balance begins to change. Not because the system has stopped functioning, but because it is no longer seen as absolute. And once perception shifts, its effects ripple outward. Now imagine this in simple terms. Think of a lock that has always been considered secure. As long as it is believed to be unbreakable, it serves as a strong deterrent. But the moment it is picked, even once, the perception changes. The lock is still there, it may still work, but it no longer carries the same weight. It no longer guarantees protection in the same way. That is exactly how perception of security works. It is not about perfection, it is about belief in reliability. And once that belief is challenged, even in a limited way, it introduces doubt. Now consider how this doubt spreads. It does not remain confined to a single incident. It becomes part of a broader narrative. Observers begin to reassess the system's effectiveness. Questions arise, not just about what happened, but about what could happen next. And those questions influence behavior. Civilians become more cautious, adjusting their routines. Leaders become more reactive, seeking to restore confidence, and adversaries may interpret the shift as an opportunity, testing the system further to see how it responds. Now think about the strategic implications. Deterrence relies heavily on perception. It depends on the belief that any attempt to challenge the system will be met with failure or significant cost. But if that belief is weakened even slightly, the threshold for challenge lowers. Actions that once seemed too risky may now appear possible. And once those actions are taken, they reinforce the perception of vulnerability. It becomes a cycle. Perception influences action, and action reinforces perception. Now consider the broader environment. In an interconnected world, perception spreads quickly. News, images, and analysis move across borders in real time. What is experienced in one place is observed everywhere. And as that information circulates, it shapes global understanding. It affects not only those directly involved, but also allies, markets, and decision makers in distant regions. Because perception of stability or instability has consequences that extend far beyond the immediate event. Now think about the long-term effect. Once belief in a system's reliability is reduced, restoring it is not immediate. It requires consistent performance, clear communication, and time. Because trust, once shaken, does not return instantly. It must be rebuilt. And during that period, uncertainty remains. That uncertainty influences decisions, shapes strategies, and alters expectations. Let me put it clearly. Security is not just about capability. It is about credibility. It is about the confidence that the system will perform when needed. And when that confidence is challenged, even in a limited way, the impact can be significant. Because perception does not require total failure. It only requires enough evidence to introduce doubt. And once doubt is present, it begins to shape reality. And the question we must now ask is this: in a world where belief in protection can be as important as protection itself, is true security defined by what systems can do, or by what people believe they will do when it matters most?